Hello YouTube, Wimian here, once again with another Bots and Tops. I wanted something quite different from K-pop in January and chose to cover the post-rock releases for February. Since I'll probably be unable to cover the final releases before March, I decided to start including the final week of the prior month as well, so we're starting on January 27th this month. To give a little intro to the genre and what it's supposed to be, post-rock was born alongside alternative and indie rock scenes between Europe and the US, but each has a much more distinct flair. Typically, they'll include an orchestral choice of instruments, giving greater ability to explore unique textures, timbres, and atmospheres, yet still typically showing the standard four-man rock band structure sans a singer. Post-rock is a really experimental genre with a lot of fitting influences from jazz, slowcore, ambient, shoegaze, anything focused on instruments and their players. The main distinction from Europe to the US was Europe having a more electronic and dub influence for the mellower sounds. As for the US, we took it to the punk and post-hardcore scenes, what many would call emo music these days. Canada tends to use a bit more classical, but all in all, the late 90s gave post-rock an explosion of popularity, particularly with groups such as Explosions in the Sky, Sigur Rós, and my favorite, Godspeed You, Black Emperor. Since this golden age, around the 2000s, artists have begun decomposing into general motifs of crescendos, epic moment music, and fun pop. Some have taken this new paradigm in stride to pull off great work, like Maybe She Will from England, but post-rock is certainly not a thriving new genre. Total yearly releases have been declining since 2011, but 2023 could be seeing the first sign of a revival. Without any more, let's see what's popping in post-rock. We'll begin with Kanoo's Deleted Years. Kanoo is a three-member group of guitar, drums, and bass hailing from London. They formed in 2018 to release a few singles, put out their first EP in 2020, and with their full album here, they're yet to catch an algorithm. Only about 25 people have bought this thing on Bandcamp, and honestly, Kanoo deserves better. For the lesser-known artists, I will link their Bandcamp page in the description so you can easily support them. I don't want to talk in circles about the album art, so let's get into Deleted Years. Track 1 is titled Zero Sum, where we get a heaping amount of prog with enough a groove for metal. It feels something like rock and roll as well, but again, those are just influences to the overarching post-rock. This is a decent intro performance, but I personally wouldn't have made it so long. It doesn't climax the whole album early, and it's a bit mellow in tone, but they'd like to think it's powerful when they're just dragging out the song. It's not great, but it's really not the worst either. Track 2 is low, and I have no idea how to count the time signature here. Definitely a math rock influence, and it's really enticing compared to the influences others would choose. The sound and instruments are generally the same, go figure, but they're just a bit more mellow than the last track. Still, not running as long, this is a bop instead of a drag, and puts this album in contention for the tops. Track 3 is Muscle Memory, which is easier to read in 4/4, and there's still lots of that progressive noise, but it hits a previous mellowness a tad harder as well. Though there's still some powerful noisy sections, it's not too extreme, and comes off as atmospheric post-rock instead of fully metal. Track 4, titled 4, shows us some basic speed metal on their still mellow instruments. The speed is actually the return of the math rock, but the players are really rocking out. The drummer is shining on this track, but not overpowering the rest of the sound. Some great stuff if you're into harder rock, and again, the kit of instruments they're using has some real uniqueness against deliberately epic orchestras. Track 5 is titled Everything New, which keeps the high-quality drumming, but lightens the rest of the sound to acoustics. The chorus here focuses on a deep droning string, a bit like prog, but the kind that really isn't for everyone. It's decent if you want an indie song, but I dare you to get this chorus past a record label. That's the punker aspect of post-rock. Track 6 is Icarus, which is about the same as all the earlier tracks. They take that acoustic style in the beginning and bring it back to a powerful rock in the second part. This could have been done with a bit more uniqueness, like including that math rock, but I'm not sure it would have helped. I was overall dissatisfied with this one, but again, not the worst. Track 7 is Machine Without Horses, taking the BPM slower and adding in a ton of electronic influence. Unlike K-pop or pop music in general, we actually enjoy electronic when it's in rock, since it can work with the electric guitars or whatever in so many unique ways, compared to the repeated drum sample number 328. That's honestly why I prefer the Euro-style post-rock, since they really know how to work their equipment. Track 8 is Cinquain, with another one of those droning choruses and a key change in the middle to make it that much more unappealing to the mainstream. I'm not complaining though, this is still some decent stuff, and I might even prefer it over track 5. The one thing that did bother me was getting the solo player attempting to end the song in a power move, but they have zero backup where it could have been such a better end. Later in this video, you'll see just how powerful that second to last track can be. Post-rock artists especially know the climax comes after the rising action, but you still need the falling action and resolution to properly wrap it up. Something to keep in mind for all aspects of life. Finally, track 9 is titled F-sharp Infinity, which definitely does not sound like Godspeed You Black Emperor's F-sharp A-sharp Infinity, probably because they're missing the A-sharp or something. The drums are mixed a little too high on this one, but this might be the best show of guitar skills besides that speed metal section. Many of the issues in the last 4 tracks rose from being like 5 or 6 minutes long, and for here, the final outro, it's only 6 minutes. They could have tightened up a lot prior and had this outro be a standout long movement, but the whole album in itself lacks deviation. They stick to the same styles with a couple different sounds, and I think they could do more, but I'm still satisfied with this thing as a whole. Next up, we have Hammock's Love in the Void. Hammock was formed in Nashville, 2004, as a duo between guitarist Mark Bird and Andrew Thompson. Well, Hammock is definitely their most popular project. These two had been guitarists together before, in the alternative rock band Common Children. They only had a few albums together from '95 until disbanding in 2002, but each one had something special to it. Since starting Hammock, they've dropped banger after banger album nearly yearly, to the point of finding work in the Far Cry 5 soundtrack, directly after scoring for the film Columbus. Though they may find more comfort in ambient or shoegaze styles, there's bound to be some outstanding post-rock mixed in. So let's get started. Track 1 is titled Procession, starting us with some ambient synths and vocal harmonies. It's really soft, without any semblance of rock, but definitely still great stuff. They carry emotions through the sound in an obviously experienced way, and know just how to get that sweeping electronic effect that so many post-rock groups attempt and fail. The LFO structure is a nice touch here as well, fitting more with the ambient style, but that's the intro for you. Track 2 is the self-titled Love in the Void. Though the drums get a bit repetitive, they catch a nice melody between guitarists. There's some more sweeping in here, just as good as the last track, but they dare to get a bit louder. It's more like noise the farther through you get, and the last section could have been removed, but this is definitely enough to make me want to hear more. Track 3 is Untruth, with a typical structure and what seems to be a light reverb backing. The vocals were unexpected, but given Mark's experience as singing for Common Children, it's no wonder they came out as good as they did. Not much in the way of lyrics, just there to fill the tone, but still super tasteful. This is the poppy, atmospheric song for people who like Mr. Kitty or whoever. Not really post-rock, but it's really quality. Track 4 is It's Okay to Be Afraid of the Universe, and here is where the drums get weirder. It might be a cowbell or empty snare. I don't know what that sound is, it's just weird. The vocal harmonization returns with a female, I believe. Melodies aren't as gut-wrenching, more of a chill track. This one recaptures the style of track 2 with a little worse mixing, likely due to the difference in song durations, but 9 minutes is pretty standard for post-rock. Also standard is the second section, but instead of climaxing at the middle, we just drop into a string section. You might not like it, but I'm still a sucker for strings, so this is pretty banger in my books. Track 5 is Release, which is where the climax from last track was hiding the whole time. The male vocals return, and there's a nice balance of talent, but unlike the previous tracks, this one is not chill at all. There's an overwhelming amount of noise, which has no resolution and just cuts abruptly, with such a lack of form to their structure, contrasting so harshly with the previous mellow style. This may be the worst track, if not the most skippable. Track 6 is Gods Becoming Memories, which is hitting my dark jazz phase with the ambient style and nice chill melody. This one is more orchestral and minimal, with a focus on the quality of instruments instead of notes being played. Still, they stick with some ambient electronic tricks, which, as I said, brings post-rock into that peak sound. Truly, this reminds me of Maybe She Will, that band with great electronic atmosphere. Here, we finally get that rising action, climax, and falling action, all in a much cleaner composition of movements. It's not an absolute masterpiece, but it's solid enough to be my top on the album. Track 7 is titled It's In This Lie, where we come back to the ambient synth for a second intro. The lyrics just repeat the song title, and chorus contrast way too hard with the song's overall substance. Everything else is decent though, with maybe a bit too much reverb on the drums. There's a nice management of tones, and the whole track stays composed, but it's just lacking uniqueness. Another decent song for Ryan Gosling from the movie Drive. Track 8 is titled I Would Stare Into the Sun With You Forever, and at this point, I'm wondering if the guy making these titles should be in contact with a mental ward. This is another spacey slow track, with the second section getting louder. The choice of synths is much more unique, and they're not just remixing old sound fonts or whatever, but still, the magnitude of the noise is just not worth it compared to their more ambient styles. Track 8 is Undoing, which is a much different guitar lo-fi type beat made for Lil Peep. At least the male vocals return, and really, they sound nearly the same. This is a decent little synth pop song, but a little more indie pop. The lyrics are again repetitive, but somehow aren't as bad as It's In This Lie. Despite the shortcomings, the phasing on the voice in the second section leading to the synth LFO on the same key is revolutionary production. It's been done before, but I love to see it anytime someone pulls it off. Track 10 is titled Absorbed in Light, taking on all the phases they're capable of, from the chillest possible to loudest possible. But again, focusing on this novelty disparages the melody. That is until the payoff comes after the climax, and it certainly comes in this track. They decided to try that LFO phasing thing again with the guitar solo here too, but it's really not as good when you're not using vocals. Track 11 is Will We Ever Be Ourselves Again? It's another orchestral track, but we get the strings earlier, so that's a bonus. They're really banking on this solo guitarist to pull off everything possible, and it's just not working without proper backing from the rest of the instruments. It's too minimal and too long to be worth a listen compared to the other tracks here. Track 12 is Denial of Endings, even a bit longer, but this is where lyrical content returns, if it was ever there at all. And by content, I really mean content, because this is some grade A songwriting. This is one of the best indie poppy songs I've heard in years, with great attention to spatial sound in the mixing. The duration is only so long because they were busy writing a sick-ass falling action movement, and everything here makes me wonder, how much longer will Hammock last, and why didn't I find them sooner? Finally, the outro is track 13, The End is the Beginning. This hits with an acoustic intro, but their typical style soon returns for another, more chill track. Like the song with the strings on the climax, this one builds up to a huge break but relaxes during the impact, only to truly climax during the second break. Again, with the long duration of post-rock, this aids the progressive sound into deeper and deeper territory with each cycle, and the more cycles you have, the more build-up is possible. This is an outstanding example of a post-rock outro, yet also Hammock sound together in general. Overall, Love in the Void is superb for daring to be more diverse and gives me hope for the future of chill post-rock everywhere. Our next album is titled Leteo, made by three-man band Loup from Madrid, Spain. Another more unknown group, their first EP was a decade ago, and they've had scarce releases between. Still, they have nearly 2,000 listeners, and besides the handful of die-hard fans, many more were tuning in and digging this new release. I will note for the production nerds, this isn't too indie of a project with professional mixing and mastering outsourced to Ultramarinos. It's just a pair of brothers located in Catalonia, but they seem to be industry proven, with multitudes of work under their belts. If you're into Spanish albums, try checking out their catalog and see what you recognize. Anyway, let's get on with their latest, Leteo by Loup. Track 1 is title track Leteo, and being under 4 minutes makes it quite short. There's obviously some darker influence, which could be lent to the post-metal. Not noisy, but a bit experimental. It's a decent chill track for the intro. They focus on only 2 notes through the song, but the backing can still be heard independently through the noise. Each member is coming off skilled, and I'd say this is a decent minimal intro. Track 2 is Sehaya, which is definitely post-metal, but the second section has some post-rock to it. This is a pretty decent example of why metal is better without vocals, but that might just be me. They bring in that tension built by dredging notes, and they've really got it down compared to most metal groups. There's still that focus on 2 notes, but it's obviously intending to establish the range of the others playing and heavily leading them through movements. This is some great slower rock and runs a bit long at 8 minutes, but it's a fine addition to the album. Track 3 is another name for me to butcher, Dopo tenebre spero la luce. Here, they start off displaying the drummer and his sticks with some more electronic style keys. As the keys fade out, the guitar is added in and the sticks get their kit back progressively. With the theme of adding more, the full kit comes with the distorted guitar, and they bring it back to closing with that electronic. This is a great example of the potential power you can build up in a 5-minute post-rock song, and it's fit for banger status. Track 4 is titled Erd, which is another at about 4 minutes. This is a more reverbed out, shoegazy track where the electronics return, but don't contribute to the power section. The breaks are instead handled by that classic guitar tremolo that's so essential to post-rock. Though pretty short, they still keep great momentum through the song, and make it worthwhile for a listen. Track 5 is The Bride of Belus, bringing us back to 8 minutes long. I'm not familiar with melodic hardcore, but this might be a prime example. I could absolutely see this played at a gothic wedding where the dress code includes multiple metal studs. The distortion is doing the heavy lifting in terms of making the sound unique, but the later section is too much for my ear to catch. Definitely some nice music to thrash in the pit to, but I'm not showering to this song. The final track 6 is T'oublier, being the longest at 10 minutes. This starts with what I consider as homage to classic post-rock, where they're not trying to reinvent it, but finding their best version of that core sound. We get a full build-up to breakdown by halfway through, where the second section has become practically an entire other song. They bring back their old distorted guitar and metal style for a pretty epic outro, but they could have ended around 3 minutes early. Still, this was a top post-rocker this month, and I'm glad I found them. Our next album is also hard to pronounce, being Rimpang by Efek Rumah Kaca. I obviously had no idea while listening, but ERK, also called Hush, Superego, or Pandai Besi, are domineers of the alternative Indonesian scene, with each member hailing from Jakarta. Their banger releases only come every 7 years, so this is a real treat of a find. They went through many lineups after forming in 2001, but when they found their sound in 2007, it really came out. It's worth noting they've picked up a new bassist and extra guitarist, with the core of their sound being more indie style art rock, but I imagine the post rock on here will be fire. Let's get into Rimpang. Track 1 is titled Fun Kaya Fun, starting out with some melodic guitar and focusing on synth harmonies. The Indonesian lyrics are unexpectedly really nice, and the first break even brings in a female vocalist, likely known as Sura. It's a little prog rocky, definitely some art in there with classical influence. Though a bit slow, they could have ended about a minute early, but this was still a banger of an intro. Track 2 is Bergaming, which has the same general sound, and I'm not complaining. The drummer is talented, and there's more piano for a ballad style, but that prog comes in again later. Still a strong mix of genres, and basically cutting that extra minute, like I said, this is another one to not skip over. Track 3 is Heroic with a lowercase k, another softer track, but adding in the tasteful guitar distortion, they leave the middle up to the art rock, and they're using much more unique synths than anyone I've heard recently. It gets old, but not too soon, and while it might drag a little, this is still solid. Track 4 is Tetapla Terlelap, which is a song to sleep to, and probably counts as a lullaby. Not in a bad way, it's just spacey with obvious reverb. This track doesn't deviate too far from their starting sound, even for the ending, but at least none of these tracks are over 5 minutes. This could be for some people, but to me, this is more boring than the last 3. Track 5 is Sondang, which explores the potential power sections of last track's style. Still super reverbed, but prog enough to be psych rock. Again, if you don't like the first 20 seconds, this is a skip, but it's still quality background music. Some of the best post-rock is stuff that doesn't go too off the rails, and I'd say they're showing a diamond core here. Track 6 is titled Kita Yang Purba, which is a fun song to graduate with your friends to. The art rock break in the middle is more abrasive, and they could have ended this one at 3 minutes. It sounds like an outro track, but we're only about halfway through. Definitely not the best on here. Track 7 is Ternak Digambata, which is another song to sleep to in terms of the early volume. Yet again, over a length of 5 minutes, they're meandering between movements and aren't hitting the same as the earlier tracks. I'd like to have something new to say about this track, but I don't. Next up at track 8 is the title, Rimpang. Unfortunately, this also fails to deviate in the same way and boils down to another psych rock ballad. Thankfully, it's the shortest track, but it's a shame to have the title here. Track 9 is Bersemi Sekibun, which isn't a ballad, but more chill and classical. They're hitting some real post-rock notes at the start, but it only becomes real when they add in the spoken word. This nearly always ruins the track for me, but the rest is some great tunes. Finally, for the epic outro at track 10, we have Manifesto. Here, it's just another fucking psych rock ballad. They managed to escape the influence of classical by being deliberately atonal and making a disgrace of a closer for what this album could have been. If your entire track gimmick is going to be pitch bending, hang up the mic or remove the song. Well, there's some great stuff in here at the start. The constant bogging down until the very end relegates this to a bot listen. Next up, we have Acid's latest work, Absolute Zero. Acid was a trio from Rock Hill, South Carolina, formed in 2009 during the members' freshman year of high school. A trio until Umil Patel's departure as drummer in 2013. Now Parth Patel plays the guitar and bass, while Connor Weiss does seemingly everything else. This is another lesser-known artist, deserving of more sales, so I'll link them below. But of course, there's still some die-hard fans. It's just hard to find a band named Acid, you know? Anyway, let's get into the sound. Track 1 is titled In the Air, using a slower beat and focusing on a groove to their metal. The mixing is a little alternative, that it sounds a bit like a garage band, but not too rough. There's some dips into real groove metal, but again, they stay pretty constrained and stick to the post-rock core. The second section brings out the full post-metal, and the outro comes back to a more acoustic sound. Lots of diversity here, and some banger sections, but I hope every song isn't mixed like this. Most of the stuff on here is 10 minutes long to give you an idea of how slow they are. Track 2 is Apex, beginning with that super heavy distortion that's trying to make me skip, but I will not fall for it. They easily transition to that prior post-metal, and instead of peaking for that second section, they bring up the distortion's volume just below the drums. Definitely unique in structure, and it ends decently at around 8 minutes, but they added 2 of trash, so not really worth a listen. Track 3 is Frostbite, and I feel like I've heard this exact distortion before, but at least they kept the drummer clearly audible over top thanks to the GarageBand alt mixing. Instead of building power with post-rock, they go for some metal sections, which are too slow for the huge power they're attempting in that distortion. There's no real build-ups or breakdowns, they're just jamming. Track 4 is Escape Velocity, where the best part of the track is when they let the guitar stop for an eighth of the measure. They even give it a whole ass break around 7 minutes to just chill for a second, and with this, the post-rock can return, and it actually becomes a decent song. Until they bring it back for the outro, proving there is nowhere to hide from whoever is behind this guitar. Track 5 is Point of Impact, which starts you off with a decent attempt of recapturing the chill parts of track 1, but if we learned anything, there is nowhere to hide from this guitar, and it cooks the track in less than a minute. They're just jamming in the garage until around 3 minutes, when they bring back that alt metal along with distortion on keys instead of strings. This is a preferable deviation for most post-rock, which we get near the middle, but it leads right back into that distorted guitar again. It's a nice track until they decide to break all melody and momentum to be epic metal lords, and yet again, this is just 2 disappointments sandwiching their potential. Track 6 is Whiteout, which gives us a calm and soothing track to build your Minecraft bases to, and it's so good. Until a third of the way through, when the guitar finally gets plugged in to blow your ears out, adding in some dainty piano and acoustics. The guitarist, again, stops having a tantrum about 2/3 of the way through, and with one more round of deja vu, they come back in a minute later to deliberately sabotage the outro. Until they tell the guitarist to lay off the acid or get some real mixing on them, this is a total bot release. Absolute zero. The next new album is Concrete Sunrise by A Reason to Travel. This is a solo project out of Copenhagen, Denmark, with only about 200 Facebook likes, and still able to convert that into 100 sales. They began with a substandard EP in 2018, but quickly gained quality through the years, leading to now. Not much is to be said of their history, but this is definitely the coolest album art, so let's see how it sounds. Track 1 is title track Concrete Sunrise. This has some quality atmospheric ambient with great use of synths to set the range. Unlike most others on this list, I feel this is actually trying to be post-rock. Even more, they wait until the second section for larger volume and keep it to a droning guitar over metal styles. The intro here is decent and stays chill throughout, but for that reason, it's not a highlight. I can tell there's better stuff coming up. Track 2 is An Empty City, which starts off so ambient and lowercase, you don't even know when it starts playing. There's a nice choice of a backing melody that stays generally the same, and the volume builds on it until peaking on that second movement once more. The peak here is much less harsh than ones relying on drums, instead giving a harmonized hum, which is much more preferable and sounds unique. This track is an outstanding mix of ambient and post-rock, and could have taken that title track name. Track 3 is titled Buildings, Ruins. Another slow starter, but uses some real unique drum samples with something like a squeak in there. The build up to the second movement is again another banger by itself, and even by the time that peak hits, the squeak drum is still there. There's a bit of volume to some vocals fading in on a mid-range note, really helping to bring the mids of the instruments together. This is an unexpectedly great example of how mixing and mastering should sound, and it's a solo artist at that. Track 4 is Dust Wanderer, which isn't so much ambient as atmospheric this time around. There's a more orchestral section of instruments, but again, the electric tuning is an excellent touch. Finally, we have the return of some standard post-rock reverb guitar tremolo, and it's just as you'd expect. The track's second half brings the volume back down to atmospheric, ending with a clean banger. This track alone gives me hope for post-rock's future. Track 5 is titled Refuge, which actually goes a bit more into dark ambient, but gets atmospheric soon enough. We get lots of that droning guitar with a solid backing piano, and it stays generally the same throughout. The build-up around the middle is subtle, but obviously present if you're getting power from somewhere. This isn't as much of a highlight as the other tracks, but still puts many others to shame. Track 6 is Last Light, beginning with a droning string and some more noisy post-rock instead of the prior quiet starts. By running post-rock from the beginning, the guitar is able to lead into drums at the middle, and that gives the buildup of instruments just so much more energy and power compared to others. There's some weird time signatures, but that's a gimmick to post-rock as well, not just math rock. This is a decent short song, but not a highlight, much like the last. Track 7 is titled I Miss the Sight of Chimneys, giving us another mix of that atmospheric ambient. The guitar here is standard post-rock, but tuning on the vocals and drums gives it an ethereal, dark wave influence, which I'm not sure they meant to do. This one is more odd in the pitch shifting department, but it stays tasteful and powerful until the outro. The electronics refuse to fade out and are well expanded until the track finally ends. This was a great closer, great opener, and great everything between. Concrete Sunrise is an absolute top this month and couldn't get any better. Next is a new album from Hubris titled The One Above. Hubris is another more well-known name from Bandcamp, hailing from Freiburg, Switzerland. Forming in 2014, they describe themselves as a quartet instead of a band, where they can blend different scene influences between electronic and metal. You may have seen their tours advertised before, as they enjoy playing live throughout Sweden to Spain. Also, according to them, this album, The One Above, is delving into Greek mythology and exploring the works of Plato and his cave, a 4-step process symbolized by the 4 tracks here. Let's try it out. Track 1 is title track, The One Above, starting us out with the remix version of the Interstellar theme and adding a random quote over top. Getting further in, there's some decent distortion with some real quality mixing. They explore a wide range of notes and bends, making some quality post-rock. The distorted guitar alone signals a break in the sound to more acoustic, and in that halfway point, you're already building to a second peak. This track might get a bit loud, but at least the players here are talented. They play the sound down in a calmer manner and settle with an overall decent intro. Track 2 is Of Light, and for a second I thought I autoplayed into the Silent Hill 3 OST. The starting guitar here is tasteful in the very same way, until breaking after the first third of the track. Still, they keep great heaviness in the melody, and dragging out that guitar leads well to a more minimal midsection. Again, the strings come back to build into a second peak, and though this might be some good noisy post-rock, 10-minute tracks are just too long. Track 3 is Shade and Gloom, which takes the same exact structure into a more mellowed reverb. They have the same quality, but it's just a different palette of their previously developed sound. This is a bit less ambient and more rock, but still sounds decent, just not much notable compared to the others. Track 4 is Beneath Othris, again with that same structure, even down to checking my autoplay for Silent Hill. This one just goes a bit more extreme in their influences, with obvious phases of metal, ambient, and prog rock going on display. It's not the best outro, and despite emulating their comfortable styles in uncomforting ways, this only means they lack deviation and uniqueness. Still, the bones of the album are rock solid, and while half of these tracks bang, that leaves it as just barely a bot listen. Our next album is Cocoon by five-piece Polish indie group Give Up to Failure. Get another case of about 1,000 fans and a handful of diehards loving the new release, but they only formed recently in 2017. This is their second album and runs on an hour-long over 10 tracks. The vocalist, Mark Magic, is in charge of all mixing and mastering, so they reserve the rights to their own music, which is baller status. I will say this is a top contender for album art this month. I'm just loving the choice of colors, though it could be a bit more cocoony. Let's get into it. For track 1, we have Chimeric Head, already showing a great exploration of their potential sounds. Despite being my first exposure to gothic rock, it's instantly recognizable, and the wave influence easily transitions into shoegaze. The lyrics are decent, and the second half focuses on a more post-metal punk style. All the players are on beat and talented, which is rare to see with vocal post-rock. Track 2 is titled Savior, starting quite a bit louder and reminding me a little of Breaking Benjamin's rock style. The lyrics are surprisingly fitting in the same way, being moody but not too cringe. Using electronics for the midsection always makes for some decent post-rock, and again, with that wave influence, we get another transition into the gothic rock. All the choices are tasteful, with great movement between them. Though there's great uniqueness throughout, the outro lacks by being unable to top everything before it, meaning it's a banger. Track 3 is Wide Awake, which comes into that poppy influence of recent years, but they don't shed that post-rock core. Though you might find less content in the lyrics, the sound is overall the same as the last tracks, being the same outstanding players. This one is also a bit slower, and maybe too much, but it's bound to happen with shoegaze on top of post-rock. Track 4 is Damages, bringing back that Breaking Ben along with their gothic rock. There's an interesting break before the middle with a post-punk and rock style, and metal comes in the second half, where they're truly killing each style. Not much deviation, but I'm not sure I'd want it anyways. This is yet another song worth the time it takes to finish. Track 5 is Sleepwalk, starting with that strong post-rock, and I wish it stuck around. Still, the melding of shoegaze and wave styles fits this track's theme very well. This is definitely a song to sleepwalk to, besides the metal sections. That post-rock does come back for a climax, and it's just as hot as the start. This is more of a unique song, and still decent. Track 6 is The Husk, with a more shoegazy punk intro, still able to keep that slow post-style drone. The mixing of the electronics is superb, keeping a thick, low sound without overpowering the bass nor the instruments. This is a more playful track, with a hint of sad, save for the powerful chorus sections. This fits right with the previous songs. While not being the best, it captures that same magic. Track 7 is titled Weakness, which is the shortest track and absolutely the most unique in sound. It's more of a synth-style ambient, playing super quiet but keeping the same vocals. The guitars are missing, and for that reason alone, I'm not going to like this one more than the others. Well, you might find meaningful content in this song. I don't. Track 8 is Slow Collapse, where the guitars are definitely back and definitely distorted. Again, a more poppy influence, circling around post-punk until that midsection, where the second half hits their core mix of sound again. This is a more powerful song, and while some could really enjoy it, I much prefer the first 6. Track 9 is titled Cocoon, being the longest, with a full return to that original post-rock form. Still with those obvious gothic and shoegaze influences like track 1, this is coming off just as good. Again, the length is due to the slowness, but this is the type of droning that'll keep you replaying it regardless. They wrap up decently in the outro, still using the same style and not deviating too far. Expanding all my favorite parts, it's everything I hoped for in a title track. The outro, track 10, is titled Suicide Letter to Myself, which takes the last track's ending melody as its intro. It's literally a piano ballad, which I hope to escape by avoiding K-pop. Pretty unoriginal, and unless the writer is actually about to end it, also cringe. The title track was a banger ending, so I advise removing this and track 7 for the best listening experience. With majority bops, this is a real top, and I'll be watching for their third album soon. Next is a 4-man band from Paris, France, named Ddent, with a double D, so it's Ddent. Forming in 2013 with an EP soon to follow. They've had albums between, but this is their second EP, titled Auditu. I'm predisposed to butchering French pronunciation, so apologies if I'm ever wrong. This is yet another group from Bandcamp with those 2,000-some fans, and they're only asking €0.50 for this whole EP. Still, with more merch options and asking for the cheapest possible, these are obviously top Gs who love the fans. They've been more known for atmospheric sludge and post-metal, but this EP takes on ethereal waves influence, and I'm ready to hear it. The intro track is titled Loup, and it's just a weird little 47-second come-up of instruments. We don't need any songs less than a minute here. Track 2 is titled Nekif Ep.2. This is more electronic and proggy, but the post-rock is obviously there. This definitely summarizes the album art with many floating melodies and the ethereal wave sound. The choice of instruments here might not fit together the best, or it could be the mixing, but overall, music remains structured and solid. Track 3 is Calidum Inatum, which I'm hoping is Latin. We get a much better utilization of electronics, especially on the drums and backing melody. Again, maybe not mixed the best, but the players are so structured together, it nearly doesn't matter. If you like the long, drawn-out songs from that prime electronic European style, this is for you. Unfortunately, being our shortest set, the outro track 4 is titled Veil, or Vale, maybe. Being a shorter track itself, this one cuts to the chase much quicker. Also, given less area to cover, the mixing is more detailed, and the droning is just as good. The prog style returns with the unique choice of melodies, and the intricate style makes the track feel longer than it truly is. This is definitely an outro to commit grand strategy warfare to, and though these 4 tracks might be an odd set, I'd easily listen to their next project. Next up is an indie-tronica duo from Los Angeles, Canada, named L1011. The two, Christian Dunn and Tim Fogarty on guitars and drums respectively, formed this duo in 2002 with their 2005 self-titled debut album remaining their most popular. Notably, many of their songs were used in the soundtracks for Gary Hustwit's design trilogy of Helvetica, Objectified, and Urbanized from 2007 to 2011. Also in these years, the duo was able to find an indie pop outlet with singer the incredible Moses Leroy in a group named The Soft Lights. This opened up L1011 to explore more intricate sounds, becoming a diverse and unique post-rock project with their fretless bass and double necks. They've made quite a career of releases since then, but we're here for their 13th album, Valley of Fire, taking it a bit more ambient pop. Track 1 is New Year's Day, with a more simple melody and a focus on light acoustics and strings. Great use of binaurals for directional or surround sound tricks, always a nice gimmick to keep songs intriguing. This isn't devoid of electronics, but definitely more dedicated to that post-rock style. Though simple, each section is unique in a small way. For an intro, this is truly a hot track to hang on the fridge. Track 2 is Not Even Almost, where the acoustic influence leads to a more jazz influence, which is a banger combo for post-rock in my opinion. The really interesting part is it sounds more like Latin jazz than something out of LA. Of course, they keep the powerful post-rock climax, and they're able to slip right back to the same melody, effortlessly changing styles. This is the uniqueness I've been waiting for, and it still sounds fantastic. Track 3 is Volsons, giving us more of a prog with electronic, but still post-rock. They're slower to focus on the groove, which makes it mid in terms of prog, and not the best they can do. Still, this is a chill short track where opinions go either way. I advise you to make your own, like me. Track 4 is titled Two Views of a Secret. Here, they don't build too much momentum and focus on the droning. The start is decent, but the distorted middle lacks that intended powerful peak. Yet another where I know it's not the best track on here, and they can obviously do better. Track 5 is White Domes, coming back to the electronic prog with a sick-ass bass line. This harmonizes with the strings much better than droning, and even the electronic cuts on here are all better. This is an overall more solid track, with practically the same tones as the earlier ones. Even their powerful distortion is muffled to not ruin the track this time. Track 6 is Days of Our Lives, which actually brings me way back to Wang Wen's My Crime from like 2005. Trust me, that's a good thing because I still listen to their stuff 18 years later. This is also another track to take on the jazz fusion, and by sticking to their roots and not dragging it out, this is the duo's reclaim to bangership. The outro, track 7, is title track Valley of Fire. Surprisingly, this is the most ambient style, keeping pretty minimal the whole way through. Not too loud compared to the others, and all things considered, it's practically as unique. While this might not make a playlist, it's still an enjoyable listen. Though some parts are a bit repetitive, this album is creative enough to be with the tops this month. Our next release is ATM Revised from post-rock and metal duo Kauan from Chelyabinsk, Russia. I've decided to ruin every pronunciation equally. Despite the Russian, most of their lyrics and work tends to incorporate the Finnish language. They formed in 2005 when it was just Anton Bulov, who you may know as the leader of Helengard. Violinist Lyubov Mushnikova joined next year, and guitarist Alexander Borovik did the same, though Lyubov left in 2011. Since Kauan's last release in 2017, Anton began exploring his own ambient classical with piano works, and he brought it back to Alex for some widely popular releases in the past decade. ATM Revised is basically a remix of a previous album in 2009, Avant Tulin Ma, or ATM. Back then, their core sound was still post-doom metal and neo-folk, but this revised version has much more ambient influence. Let's see how it holds up. I suck at Finnish too, but track 1 is Omeltu Polu. Pretty chill guitar, just some good old post-rock and not getting too loud. The notes are coming through clear and ring with a classical influence. Nothing over the top here. The sound remains tame and tasteful to the end. It leaves a bit to be desired, but they're doing everything they can to not ruin the song, which means nothing too unique. Track 2 is Valveuni, and this is the type of post-rock to make me say, holy shit. The outstanding effects from mixing and synths gives this song true ambience and atmosphere, and both alone are reasons to make this track so long. Any conflict only causes distinction in the sound's movement because they strategically avoid conflict in every other place. I can't tell if the lyrics are Finnish or Russian, but they're not bad and at least fit the song. We get a piano section that's a bit of an impressionist waltz, and the outro here is another powerful banger. Yet another absolutely worthwhile song. Track 3 is Fawn, like John with an F. They start with heavier guitars, but still mellow sound. It's more of a rock song than post-rock, but still uses some decently long sections. The rise and fall sections here are incomparable to last track and can't possibly fit the same shoes. It makes this song just a bit more boring, but it's still standard and solid like the first. Track 4 is Sokea Sisar, which is another getting more prog rock than post. The melody pays homage to the epic violin guy from Eurovision, so glory to Russia, I guess. They cut back to the more electronic prog for the second half, and though being an overall darker song than the last, this still has some unique flavor. Again, the ambient atmosphere in the outro here is top class. Track 5 is Nulana Hitkesa, starting a more chill and mellow, finally being plausibly post-rock. This has that uniqueness and power that the others lacked, where there's actually a climax in the midsection, and they leave enough space to break and rebuild into a second for the outro. This satisfies in every way it's meant to, and between these 5 tracks, this album was a total top. Impressive work. The next to last album is a space rock revival trio all the way back from '97 Ottawa named Southpacific. This group recorded merely one self-titled EP and one album named Constance before the year 2000, but they're back with a vengeance, I guess. That album, Constance, was reviewed as the best possible ambient-style alt-rock you could find in Ontario back in 2000. So we'll see if they can recapture that magic 23 years later. I was literally age 0 back then. Track 1 is Radar Road, getting some heavy distortion, but it starts out quiet, with this discrepancy sounding more like noise rock. Still, it's not too overwhelming or clippy, and they have this unique method of using static as a backing track, which is my favorite instrument. The emphasis on uniqueness gives off more project song vibes, and it's a bit amateurish with not much power, but still, this is a great, solid, structured post-rock song. Track 2 is Breakdown, which is pretty much the same style, with more of a focus on effects for the guitar. The lyrics come in, and they aren't very fitting. Both the players and mixing could use some more confidence, but with their solid low movements, they're not doing any damage to my speakers. I could nearly sleep to this. Track 3 is Pure Distance, which goes back to vocalists with a focus on happier tones. There's nice movements from energy to mellow all throughout, and while the players may be out of sync on some beats, they catch up to each other. The sound's made by real humans who don't touch computers too much, but they should probably hire a mixer anyways. Track 4 is Depths, giving us a more 90s, 80s style with huge focus on that bass line. The reverb to hell drums are pretty standard as well. This sounds like any other decent post-rock song with a few sections of harmony, but also hitting the best climax so far. Being a shorter track, this one is more playlistable than most we've covered. For track 5, we have the outro, For Years. Kind of a shoegaze track, but at least they're trying something new. That detuned static backing returns for the climax, and it's still just as good and interesting. I believed there was a lot of creative expression missing from that style of static until I realized I just don't like the other parts as much. With every track not being too bad and those 2 minutes of static being the best, I just don't think I like this album that much. Another barely bought listen. Our final release for February is from Bosco Sacro, a play on words of the Sacro Bosco, or Sacred Grove Garden of central Italy, home to some outstanding sculptures and artwork. This is a 4-piece ambient wave quartet, and though Gem here is their debut album, the group features many recent indie artists around Massa Carrara and Venice, also beautiful regions. Besides Luca Scotti drumming, the others were previously known as Julinko, the star pillow, and Altaj for vocals and 2 guitarists respectively. Besides my dark jazz phase, I'm also in my female vocal dark wave phase, so this could be a real banger. I will know Altaj and Luca have been making post-rock in Pavia, Italy since 2016 under the name Tristan da Cunha, so that could be the quartet's origins. Only starting in 2023, this released under the Italian label Avant-Garde Music and has already netted over 100 sales. Now, let's finally begin with Bosco Sacro's Gem. Track 1, titled Ice Was Pure, gives us that wave of ambient and atmosphere and an orchestra instead of guitars. Still, they're able to pull off great harrowing strings and movements with matching talent in the Italian vocals. It does remind me a bit of that gothic rock as usual, but this is very post-rock between the quartet. Definitely a solid opener. Track 2 is Be Dust, which starts very calming again, but soon transitions to some classical tension. This trend follows over and over through the song, slowly building to the full climax. By this structure, it nearly reminds me of dark jazz, but that's just my bias talking. With the full climax sounding outstanding and a notable drone out, these players obviously know their harmony. Credit to the vocalist, too, bringing a much more unique quality to the power. Track 3 is Fountain of Wealth, giving us some more of that dark wave style vocals, nearly like the Kilimanjaro Dark Jazz Ensemble. Maybe this is just what post-rock sounds like without guitars, but regardless, I'm not complaining. This takes 3 minutes less than the last track, and it's still just as enjoyable. By these 3 alone, I'm convinced we're looking at a top album. Track 4 is Emerald Blood, which starts about the same, but we're definitely reaching post-rock now. With the super unique vocal progression, I can't tell who's more talented, but I know everyone here is. This is definitely the most powerful track, with a peak in the midsection and extra time to play off. This is also one that could have gone without the last minute, but still great nonetheless. Track 5 is Les Arbes Rampantes, hitting on a single guitar note until about that midsection. In the same key, the vocals take over from the climax. It's definitely powerful, but I don't think the build-up had to be the entire track. Also a bit too slow, but again, we're dealing with wavy post-rock here. The other tracks are better, but this isn't bad at all. Finally, we reach the outro, track 6, self-titled Bosco Sacro. That single guitar note is back, and of course, it's a ballad. Very tame and short compared to the others here, and not quite a summary of their sound, but you can't go wrong with ballad closers. Unless I'm listening, then you're out of luck. This gem ended up being a total gem of an album, and I definitely can't wait for some more Bosco Sacro. Due to February ending 3 days before every other month, I was 3 days late making the script of this video. Listening to so many hours of music every month is hard to keep up with considering my other projects, so I may stick to less popular genres in the future and hopefully end up with shorter videos than this. Post-rock was kind of a meme to test my patience since the tracks are so commonly so long, but I would rather focus on other things than hours of mid-music, just trying to find a few songs I like. The truth is, I don't like that many songs, but I have a really good idea of what I do like, and I seek it out obsessively. In the future, I'll probably just take some months for an album or two, but Bots and Tops will continue to aid your music exploration with all our Bandcamp artists. Again, links to the pages will be down below, and drop a like while you're down there. Until next time, this is Wimyan, signing off.